Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my September wrap up. Now for August I obviously did Speedopoly and managed to squeeze so many goddamn books in, and then I wrapped them up as a big genre wrap up. So this is the first monthly wrap up that I've done in a while, so please forgive me if it turns out to be trash. I'm clearly out of practice. So I didn't have a Top Trumps TBR for September because I took part in Becca's Bookoplathon, which was fantastic. I did 6 initial rolls, which I will talk about, and then I did additional rolls. The 6 initial rolls, the first of which was Light Cover, which I picked Throne of Glass. POC Rep, of which I picked Always and Forever Lara Jean. The Community Shelf ended up being Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Own Voices was I Am Thunder. Set in the Present was Run Riot. And my highest rated, which was Clap When You Land. So I will start with those books. Let's do them in the order that I actually read them in, because it wasn't that order necessarily. So the first one that I read, I actually did as an audiobook. I did Brave New World. Now, I put half classics, half modern books in the Community Shelf. So essentially the Community Shelf, it's books that you do and don't want to read. Bought it from a charity shop for £1 a few months ago. But it was one of those classics where I felt I needed to read it to truly understand why it's seen as a contemporary classic, and I do kind of get it now. I wouldn't say I enjoyed this. I gave it 3 stars. What was fascinating about it was kind of seeing how it's influenced science fiction and specifically dystopian novels since then. There are some hella problematic themes of this. The fact that they keep calling the one slightly strange character the Savage for a start, and the fact that he's raised in this place that's not been utopianized or whatever it is. How would you describe the verb once you've turned something into a utopia? Because it's not civilized. They keep calling it civilized, but their actual civilization is not civilized at all, which is kind of ironic. So considering this was written nearly 100 years ago, there are some themes of this that obviously would have been completely bizarre and were kind of included to show how ridiculous the world is, that I can actually see happening nowadays, which is just so bizarre. But if you are a science fiction nerd and you've not yet read this, I would definitely recommend it, because you do start to see all the tropes and stuff. This is kind of like the grandfather of that, and it's really interesting to see the little things of that in this. But it's not a book that you would read for pleasure, in my opinion. I like reading classics, but I like reading them because I like the challenge of them, as opposed to because I read them to enjoy or relax. A lot of the books that I did read and enjoy and have given 5 stars are books that I enjoyed because they were relaxing. This ain't it. But it is good. So yeah, like I said, 3 stars. Because yeah, it's weird when you liked a book but you're not necessarily going to recommend it to other people. This is a new zone for me, because usually if I really like a book I'm like, yes, definitely go out and read it. And whilst I would recommend it if you're interested in classics and or science fiction, there are better books that were written in the last 10 years, so maybe read those first. If you're writing science fiction, definitely read this, but otherwise I'll leave that one there. The next one I read was Always and Forever Lara Jean. This is the 3rd in a trilogy. I was really tentative going into this one, purely because I loved the first one. The first one got me into reading romance again. The second one was such a bitter disappointment. And the third one knocked it out of the park for me. I absolutely loved this. It made me want to go back to university again, because the whole narrative is around her building up to go to a university, and then her love life kind of becoming second place to that, and her dealing with that. The one issue that I have is the fact that it's not so much a miscommunication trope in this, but the fact that she, throughout the first half of the book, is constantly saying, I know him so well. And then the last 3 chapters where everything is kind of resolved, it just goes to show that she was assuming he was feeling certain things and actually he was feeling completely different things. And it's just like, that was my only frustration. But fundamentally you're not going to have any conflict if they just get on all the time, so I understand that it had to be the case. I gave this 5 stars, where I only gave the second one 3. Really compelling, really fun. The characters are fantastic. Kitty really comes into her own in this one, and I loved it. I think this might be my favourite of the 3. It ended on a high, which is hard going for a sequel, but I love this. I don't think you even need to read the first 2 books to appreciate this. I think it stands really well on its own, which again is novel for a sequel. 10 out of 10. Then I decided, I left it for a while, so what I did then is after I had done 2 roles and I had completed 2 roles, I then added additional roles. So the next one that I read, The Selection by Kira Cass, I will not be finishing this series. And I know I'm a horrible person for wanting what I wanted out of this book and not getting it, but I'll tell you anyway, everyone is just so nice to each other, and nothing bad happens, and it was so boring. Like, everyone's really, there's one slightly antagonistic girl, but you know she's not going to get her own way because she's not even really a contender at this point. You know, the nastiest thing she does is rip someone's dress, and it's just such a first world problem that I just can't even. But the pacing of this and the way it was written really reminded me of Victoria Aveyard's Red Queen. Now, I found that really frustrating because the further I got into the series, the darker and more depressing it became, and there were just certain characters where you'd get their perspective and I just didn't care. But at least there was intrigue and at least there was betrayal. In this, I kept waiting for that to happen, and it never did. And maybe that's what it will take to sell this to you, because fundamentally, like, everyone's nice to each other and always and forever Lara Jean, but in a different way. I was expecting if you're in a castle and you've got this weird dystopia or utopia where, you know, people are working hand to mouth for food, but then she suddenly gets whisked away, you'd think there'd be something, and there just isn't. There's no political intrigue. When they do have someone attack the castle, everyone is fine. So it's just, yeah, like I said, I will not be picking up the rest of the series because I just didn't care for it. To compensate for how nice everyone was with that one, I then read The Furies, which was another additional role. This one, so just to say that the pick for that one was YA, which is why that came up. Although I guess it kind of, I don't know if that's YA or middle grade. It says YA, but after that came The Gifted. This was gifted to me by Ashley from Frolic Through Fiction, and I fucking loved this. I loved this because this could not be further away from this if it tried. This is like if Skins had occult witchery in it. It was fantastic. The characters are horrible to each other. The girls are devious and manipulative, and I believed every second of it. It's a really kind of like slow burn, darkly paced, gothic, it is a modern gothic novel. Katie Lowe is an absolute babe as well, just throwing that out there. But this book is just chef's kiss. Loved this. I don't want to tell you what happens because fundamentally the moment I give even something away, it will all come tumbling out. But this is so good. So good. And I had originally saved this for my Dark Academia for Gothtober. I'm not disappointed that I didn't get to read it through Gothtober. It kind of set me up for Gothtober because this just had all the spooky, dark, murdery vibes that I wanted, and it was just fantastic. So thank you, Ashley, for being absolutely spot on with your gifting. Let's talk about I Am Thunder. So I tried I Am Thunder next, and I really didn't get on with it. I think I got about 40 pages, which is barely 10 chapters. They are short chapters. Yeah, so I got 5 chapters in before I just couldn't anymore. The dialogue in this is just bizarre, and it's not even that it's a case of it's young people talking how you'd expect them to. It's the motives of the character and the behaviour and how weirdly paced it is. And after 5 chapters, and knowing that I had other books left on my TBR, I just DNF'd it. I just could not get on with it. And it's a real shame because I had really high hopes for this. Like I said, this was my own voice's choice, so I had really high hopes for it. It was lots of little things, so like I said, like the pacing and the dialogue and things like that. If it had been just one of those things, it probably wouldn't have bothered me. And it's a shame because by chapter 5 nothing's happened to kind of actually start that story. You're kind of just getting a basis of the characters. The conflict hasn't even been introduced yet, and I just didn't care by that point. Like, it had taken too long. Like, that was really disappointing, and that was my first DNF of the month. Thankfully there were only 3, and only 2 of them were justified like this. I just couldn't get on with it. Then I decided to read Run Riot. So Run Riot is about a young man who gets killed by the police, and it's caught on camera, and then the kids who catch it on camera then have to kind of share it with the wider public, and it's about police brutality and people of colour and living in estates and rap music. And Nikesh Shukla is just a fantastic writer because this has fractured structure, so you're moving through times. It's not in chapters but kind of in moments, which is really, really clever. I really liked that. I really liked the characters. What I thought, like, as a character study, to compare these two for a second, both of them have kind of colloquial dialogue. Both of them have characters that are not necessarily likeable characters, but fundamentally have a conflict that is relatable. Both of them are from authors of colour, and yet this was miles ahead of the other one, in my opinion. And I know necessarily shouldn't compare that way, but I guess coming off the back of something that I really didn't like, I was really worried this was going to be the same. I devoured this in 3 days. Like, I got caught up in it. I was having, like, not an anxiety attack, but I was having, like, my heart was racing reading this, and that is rare for me because I am so emotionally detached when I read. And I was sat in a coffee shop with the pandemic going on and just the claustrophobia of being out in public anyway, and this was just fantastic. It had such an atmosphere, and it was so frightening because it's so frighteningly real, and these instances do still happen, that it was just absolutely brutal. So I gave it 5 stars. I thought this was absolutely wicked, and I would definitely recommend it to everyone to read. It's not a particularly long book, but it is fantastic. Then I read Throne of Glass, which, let's be honest, everyone knew I was going to love this. I don't know why I've been putting it off so long. I think because it means that the moment I pick this up, I am committing to yet another series. I loved this. I loved the political intrigue. I loved the betrayals. I loved the action scenes. I love an angry female character, and this had this in spades. I really enjoyed this. I mean, I really enjoy Sarah J Maas's writing anyway. I'm not afraid to admit that. For me, it's a very easy style of writing to read. It's very compelling because it's very fast action paced. There is a lot of description in it, but it doesn't feel heavy. The world feels thoroughly built. The mythology is there. We don't need to know all of it. It does have those mystery elements, but it's definitely more of a fantasy. My only point of contention is I don't care about any of the male love interest in this. Now, I appreciate that it's a series of 7 books. Yep, 7 books. So I'm sure I'll find someone that I fancy at some point. But at the moment, with book 1, I'm kind of, it's fine that there isn't anyone. And I know certain characters, because obviously it's been out so long, that I do know that certain characters are going to come into the frame, but we haven't got there yet. It was an easy, fun read. And if you like easy fantasy, this is it. I think I gave it 4 stars. There was nothing fault-worthy with it. It didn't blow me away, but I really enjoyed it. And then my last of the original roles was Clap When You Land. This did blow me away. This was phenomenal. I was really surprised that it took so long for the main characters to meet each other, but essentially this book is about a man dies in an aircraft and his 2 daughters from 2 separate nations finally get to meet each other, even though they didn't know the other existed. And it's kind of coming to terms with grief in their individual ways. Trigger warnings for sexual assault. It is LGBTQ. It is own voices, and it is fantastic. This would have ticked off so many prompts in Gothtober without it even being a gothic fiction book, which is just something that came to my mind. I just hadn't thought about that until just now. I really enjoyed this. I thought the pacing of this was beautiful. The language in this is beautiful. I am really, really getting into verse, so the kind of borderland of poetry and prose I'm really, really enjoying. Elizabeth Acevedo just seems to absolutely nail it. This is the 2nd book now of hers that I've read that I've absolutely loved. And I think she has 1 more out, which I will be getting and I will be enjoying, I'm sure. Let's talk about the next book that I DNF'd. So the next prompt that came up was water, and obviously Surfacing has water at the front. I didn't DNF this other than I had 3 days left of Bookopoly. I was 100 pages in. I've read it before. I had forgotten that I'd read it before. So once I got about 100 pages in, I just lost interest and I stopped reading it. And I hadn't put it on Goodreads that I was reading it yet, so I just put it down and didn't pick it up again. And that is all. That's all there is to that. Surfacing is about a group of young adults who kind of return to a place that has a lot of nostalgia for them, but for one of them it was slightly darker than others. And it is literary fiction, so it does move very slowly. It does take a lot to get into, and it's not the easiest to read. I just lost interest. Nothing on Margaret Atwood's writing. This just isn't her best work, and it just didn't hold my attention long enough. The last book was actually on my TBR. It's obviously The Hobbit for the Tolkien along. I will be reading the Fellowship of the Ring for October, even though I forgot to mention it in my Gothtober TBR video. I absolutely loved this. I forgot how much I enjoyed this. I forgot how much I enjoyed the language of it. The pacing of it threw me a little bit, I guess because I haven't read it in a while, but I've obviously seen the films, so I forgot how quickly the book ends versus in the films. I prefer the book to the films. I feel like there's a lot of padding in the films, but actually I can see why they've done it because it does improve the pacing. I feel like in this it takes a really long time to get off the ground, and then once it's there, it's there. I really love the world in this. Yeah, I love the conversation between Smaug and the Hobbit. It still has a really warm place of nostalgia in my heart, so I appreciated that, and it's always fun to reread something you read as a child and to have it stand up still, because I think there have been a few books that I've reread from my childhood this year that have been trash, but this was not one of them. This was absolutely fantastic, and I did the first half reading it and I did the second half reading it as an audiobook, and it was just so perfect to have it read to me again. I just felt like a child, and it just took me back to my happy place, and it was just really special. So that was a really nice way to end September, to be honest. A book that wasn't on my TBR but was kind of carried over from August was The Book Thief. Now this was a book that I pulled out as one of my top trumps cards. I think it was for number of pages, probably number of pages, because it's massive. And I can see why so many people enjoy this book, but for me it was just okay. There wasn't anything necessarily that blew me away. The writing style was interesting. I love the idea that it's the perspective of death. There were some really dark moments that were done really beautifully. It was a very clever and very well written book. I really struggle in general with books over 400 pages. This is just under 600, so it is long, and my attention span just can't keep up with something like that. I need to move on to something else. It's why I end up reading 5 or 6 books at a time. So this was another one that was a leftover from my top trumps TBR. I'm not even going to explain, I'm just going to read you the first page. And I know some people really hate it when booktubers don't kind of just give you a brief synopsis, they read from it, but you're gonna want to just shh and listen. I splash cold water on my face. This is what men in movies do when they're about to fly off the handle, when shit is getting out of control. I do this sometimes. I react to things based on what characters in movies would do. That's kind of ironic, considering I've always thought of myself as a book person. At least, I think that's ironic. That word gets misused a lot. The water isn't refreshing like it's supposed to be. It's ice cold and I gasp. As it swirls into a little cyclone on its way down the drain, I look in the mirror, ashamed and angry at myself. There's something wrong with my penis. That's only halfway down the first page. Penis is mentioned halfway down the first page. And you think, oh Hannah, okay, fine, he's got erectile dysfunction. Loads of guys get it, it's important to normalise it. Let's read the rest of the page, shall we? It's been an unpredictable thing for a while now, my schlong. All flighty and unreliable, like some stoner uncle who shows up hammered at Thanksgiving and forgets your name. The guy I see in the mirror, Tom Violet, the same lanky, moody bastard I've been looking at for almost 36 years now, looks ... old. The fact that I'm naked certainly isn't helping. Like most men who are not Brad Pitt, I could do without the sight of my own nudity. Back in the day, I was a long-distance runner, all streamlined and put together. Now I'm flabby thin, the way a fat guy might look after a year in an internment camp. I've never DNF'd a book from one page before. There is a first time for everything. I don't even want to unhaul this because I don't want someone else to pick it up and think, oh, that looks like an interesting read, because I'm probably going to turn it into some kind of weird schlong collage. And that's my wrap up. So those are all the books that I read this month and didn't read. Let me know in the comments below what you read and what your favourite book of the month is. I think my favourite is probably The Furies, followed very closely by Cloud When You Land. They are just absolutely spectacular reads and I would definitely recommend them. Other than that, I hope it's sunny where you are and have a nice day.
If you're gonna tell them everything,
Tell them I'm a good kisser. It's been a while since she updated it. There we go. Right.
tell them the
Way that you broke my heart when you told me that you missed her.
Tell them I'm a good kisser. I'm